We'll nonetheless challenge you with lots of questions, myself and David, and we'll be able to do that. So why don't we get going? So good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Guy Battle. I'm the chair of the public sector chapter for the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, and delighted to welcome you to one of our webinars, one of our sessions that you'll be watching. So we've got a relatively short agenda here, but we've got a really fantastic speaker who's going to tell us all about what's happening across the west coast of Vancouver. What I thought I'd do is just tell you a little bit about the chapter first, and encourage people to join up and get involved, and then I will introduce our speaker. So my name is Guy Battle. As I mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, the public sector group. I'm co-chair with Rachel Lemos, who is, again, she's actually Canadian. She's works for Vancouver Ferries, BC Ferries out in the west coast of Canada. Then we've got also a steering committee, Gonzalo, Helen, Patrick, who's going to talk to us today, and also a Q Muller, who's based in Dubai. So that's our steering committee. We welcome you to these events, so please do pass them around and let your colleagues know. And I guess why are we even having this discussion? Well, it's quite interesting actually, because there is a tendency, I think, to believe that sustainable procurement exists mostly within the private sector, and that the private sector has all the answers and is driving the agenda. And within our group, we are adamant that we know better. No, I don't mean that. In our group, we are adamant that we know as much as the private sector. And actually, there is a very strong argument to say that the public sector is perfectly placed to lead a discussion. And if you consider that there is many millions, trillions of dollars spent through the public sector every year, those are relationships between the public and private. Those are relationships over the contractual boundary through procurement. And there's a massive opportunity for the public sector to engage its suppliers in delivering its own priorities. And plainly, what we're here to talk about is how to embed sustainable priorities into our procurement. Now, it's not easy, it's hard to do. And actually, we find that there's a number of barriers that exist around getting leadership buy-in, around building the capacity within the supply chain, and actually just do the practical aspects of evaluation and how you actually make it fair and transparent. These are all issues that are pretty unique to the public sector, in as much that because we have responsibility to spend public sector money, we also have responsibility for transparency. And so we are bound to be transparent and be open about how we have awarded contracts. And so we have to be fair in our award, and got to be clear about our award criteria. And so that adds a different layer to it. So what we're doing within this group is we are asking people from around the world to tell us what's happening, what are they doing around sustainable procurement. And we're looking to develop a shared definition of public sector procurement as one of our key outcomes. We're also looking to develop a sort of a bank of information for people to dive into and see what's happening around the world. And then develop good practice, and ultimately put some guidance documents together so that anyone anywhere in the world can see what good practice looks like, and indeed how to develop. So that's something we're doing over the next months or years. And so it's great to have you here to be part of that journey. So I'm now delighted that we're going to continue this discovery of how sustainable procurement is being delivered in different countries. We've had some really interesting speakers so far. We've had the UN head of Sustainable Procurement at the UN. We've had a couple of people out of Holland talking to us. We've had people from Germany talking to us. And now it's the chance of Canada, more specifically Patrick Shannon, who is the purchasing manager at Westminster City in British Columbia, Canada. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome you, Patrick. Excited to hear your presentation, and we'll hold questions until we get to the end, and we'll have a discussion and then ask some series of questions and then enjoy the conversation. So I'll hand over to you now to share your slides, Patrick.
Perfect. Thank you, Guy. So small group here, but I've been in the procurement field for 30 years, and I feel like today more than ever, our profession is in a position to make the changes that are needed both in social and sustainable procurement. And today I'm just going to kind of go over what our city, the city that I work in, what we're doing through our budgeting, through our whole process on how we're dealing with these issues. And, you know, Guy was talking about the $1 trillion. Well, my city's small, so our budget's only about 100 million, 130 to maybe 200 if I take in operating expenses. But I also believe public procurement is in a position to help push these ideas forward more than private, because we're getting requests from our residents to do this, from the public. They're asking us to make these changes, and we deliver to it. So I'm going to just do a quick presentation, talk a little bit about the city I work in and the things that we're doing. Okay. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen here. So that's my city that I work in. So the topics today I'm going to talk about is a little bit about New West, a little bit about me, our budgeting process, what all this meant for within the department, the purchasing department, and then how we're dealing with how to award direct contracts or dealing within our procurement policy and trade agreements to deal with the social and sustainable issues that we're facing today. So who am I? My name is Patrick Shannon. I'm the purchasing manager. I hold my SPP designation. I'm a member of this public sector procurement chapter. I'm also the president of Supply Chain Canada for the BC Institute. And I'm going to again go over some of the slides on how we're addressing it, climate change and social issues. And I wanted just to say that, again, we're a small city, small budget, but, I've taken courses in the past. And one thing that always sticks in my mind is you don't have to make large changes. It's those 1% incremental changes that you can make that over time starts to become a bigger change. And that's what I believe in and what the city believes in. So a little bit about our city. As Guy said, we're in Western Canada. We're just located outside of Vancouver. We have a population of only about 83,000, but we're a very small city, very condensed. We're about 5,000 square feet. We estimate a population by 2031 of 94,000 residents, and we have a mixture of European, Asian, and Indigenous people living in our city. And I'm going to go over a little bit more on why that's important when we're dealing with our social issues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our city's budget. In 2019, our city, like many other areas, declared a climate emergency. And out of that, we developed 7 bold steps for climate action on how the city wants to address it through our spend, through both our operating and our capital spend. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we looked at and how we address those. So these are our 7 bold steps. Many of them are very similar to what other people have brought in. Again, we're trying to get to net zero emissions by 2030, have a car light community, carbon-free homes and buildings. So right now, all of our buildings within the city that we own or maintain, we're looking to be, replacing all gas with electric. Pollution-free vehicles, carbon-free energy. We're building up our EV grid, both through the city on where we can put them in the most logical places so people can use them. We're definitely working on our urban forest, and you're going to see some slides on that. So we want to increase our forest canopy by 27% by 2030, which means planting a lot of trees and other things that we do. And then, of course, we want to have a more of a city where people can gather, can within, not necessarily the 15-minute city, but where people can go and meet. And like it says here, we want to take 10% of our streets and use it for public gathering or other public transportation. So what does this mean for the budgeting? In 2019, and it's still active today, we took the 7 steps and we started to say, how are we going to apply the budget? How are we going to apply how we spend our money? So as people put projects together, they had to link up, if they could, their project to the 7 bold steps. How were we using our funds to address the 7 bold steps? We embedded carbon pricing into decision making. So what we do for all of our vehicles, we say if we buy a gas vehicle, what's the carbon pricing against versus electric version? Of course, like many companies or like cities, not everything is available in electric. So we looked at an electric fire truck, but the technology is just not there yet. The safety part is high, so we can't move to electric fire trucks. Right now we looked at electric garbage trucks, but again, technology is not there. The garbage trucks can only work for 4 hours a day, so we would actually have to have double the amount of garbage trucks, plus they're very expensive. So again, we made some decisions today to say, okay, we're not ready today, but let's reevaluate it in 4 to 5 years. We've also implemented climate action levy on electric utility bills, and we're using those funds to further our sustainable policies. So this is an example of so cities in BC, we're required to put a 5-year plan together and publish this for the residents. So in our 2022 to 2026 plan, we had $453 million in our capital plan. And we were able to take the 7 bold steps and apply these budget amounts to that. And a number of projects, some are small, you can see like it could be only $500,000. But again, it's those 1% incremental changes. You just can't go out and save the world in a day. It takes time and you have to plan it. So here's some examples. And this is things that I've been learning. 6 years ago when I joined the city, I didn't get as much as this, but now biodiversity, urban forestry, the amount of work coming to us is increasing. We're going out there to work with the businesses, and a lot of cases, and I'll talk a little bit more, we don't even have suppliers fully up and running or even able to respond to our RFP or our tender requests. But we are looking at increasing the biodiversity within our cities. And things that I'm learning again is the typical trees we used to plant 20, 30, 40 years ago will no longer survive in this new climate change. We have to change the species of trees and the plants that we're planting to adapt to a warmer climate. Other things that we've done, and it's interesting, again, when you talk about providing bike lanes, walking lanes, it's a lot of work for a city. Cities have to plan these years in advance. Even when you see expanded sidewalks, you can't just expand a sidewalk without looking at all the safety that is needed for it. You have to put lighting. You have to make sure you've got marked crosswalks. So these are some of the things that we did in 2022. It's, again, we have what we call here an active transportation network plan. We've looked at implementing a little bit each year on how to have residents get out of their cars and move around via foot, via their bikes, or public transit. And again, this has to be done in partnership with other levels of government. So we have provincial government that manages our bus system. So we have to work with them. It's a lot of work in the background that goes on just to make simple changes like this. So what did all this mean for purchasing? What it means for us now is when the businesses come to us, they're not coming like business like normal. I'm not just paving a street. We're dealing with a lot of different requirements. And it's not just around GHGs, it's around the social aspect. So it's required us to listen more, to look at what are they trying to do, and maybe what we did 2 to 3 years ago is no longer usable today. The complexity is increased. As Guy was saying, we have to be fair and transparent. How do we evaluate suppliers? How do we evaluate how social or sustainable they are? All of our RFPs and tenders have to follow our city's corporate energy and emissions reduction strategy. And what this is it's a set of requirements that we have for when a city project manager is building a new building or renovating, they have to comply with with our strategy. We're looking at opportunities to electrify or gradually remove out, again, some of the older fossil fuel equipment. But the interesting part is the city of New West, we are one of the rare cities in this province who own our own electric company. So not only do we have to plan for making these type of changes like EVs, but we have to also invest in our infrastructure for our electrical. Because if every car in New West converted to electric tomorrow, we couldn't even provide the power to them for them to charge their vehicles. And I think this is a problem around the world. We it's got to take time. So we're working on a 50-year plan on how will we be able to adapt for what's coming to us in the future. You can't just, again, make quick changes. You have to plan this well in advance and work with our partners within the province so that we can even generate enough electricity. This one we're pretty excited about. We're building this huge new aquatic and community pool, but we're the first aquatic center to achieve a green building, zero carbon building standard in Canada. And you think about this, this is a huge mammoth building, but we've done we've invested in the technology to reduce our GHGs. We've also went over to Europe, and we're using an in-blue pool drum filtration system. It filters the water better. Again, it's also more sustainable. And then when we're finished, we're installing a 300 megawatt solar panels on top of the roof, as to promote that sustainability part. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the social parts as well. Like many cities around the world, we're dealing with homelessness, drug addiction, and everything else. So we have to look at how are we supporting these people, and simple things like the right to go to the washroom is paramount. So we're building prefabricated washrooms through different locations in the city. We're looking at building areas where they can get shade, where they can, where not only they can go, but residents can go as well. So there's a lot to some of these plans. It's not just, let's go put a washroom here, because even the washrooms, they need to have running water, they need to have electricity, they need to have that whole infrastructure, and it takes time to develop that. Social housing. So again, we work with housing and childcare. We work with provincial institutes to build social housing. Again, like many other cities, there's not enough daycare centers. So we have to build daycare centers and work with nonprofits to actually provide that. We've got, as you see here, like these are examples, a 96 unit for Indigenous tenants. It's under construction. We're looking at supportive housing for 52 people, 52 families in the city. And again, remember, this is just a little city of 73,000 people, small 5,000 square kilometers. It's not a huge, like 5,000, I can't remember what I said. but we're a small little city. So take what we're doing and put it to some of the larger cities, and you can see how all of us working together can make these changes. So other things that we do, so and earlier I talked about the breakdown of the people living here. We know that we have Canada has a lot of immigrants. We get our whole population is increasing, and right now our federal government is allowing up to 500,000 new immigrants per year. And a lot of these immigrants settle in West Coast and in New West. So when they come here, they don't know anything. They don't know how we operate. So this is an example of where we hosted immigrants, brought them to City Hall, got them to see how the City Hall works. And I highlighted something here that it says city includes everyone, and social inclusion is important. So these are examples of where the city is using its resources to reach out to immigrants to, again, bring them in, welcome to the city, welcome them to Canada. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in the background that, it's usually smaller dollars, but we're, again, trying to address our social issues and sustainability. So this is just historic. How did we get to where we are today? Like many of us back in the days, it was all about price, 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 price. You talked about sustainability, you talked about social, and nobody wanted to hear you. They wanted every penny they could save. Then we started talking about green procurement, reduce the impact on landfill, reuse building materials, ethical purchasing, use recycled material, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're in to the next phase of this, which is about social, sustainable, reducing GHG. So we ask questions about, not about the goods that they're giving us, but how does the company themselves, what is their policy on how they reduce GHGs? How are they, how are they working within their own area to deal with social issues going on? What community benefits are they providing? And ensure that they're ethically aligned with what the city is all about. So we in the city focus on best value. And what we're looking at is not just the lowest dollars, but also how are we impacting the local economy, or here's some examples of the community. So are we using a local supplier? Are we using a diverse supplier? And again, cities like us, we get a lot of requests from the local business community to say, you should be buying from us. And then, we got other groups, LGBTQ and all of them, who want to work with us. We're looking at, again, how to reduce GHG emissions. And a good example of this is say like a no idle policy. If you're paving a street, do you still idle? Because that's a lot of GHGs that occur when you've got these huge vehicles, trucks, and all of that, just idling for hours, hours, and hours. Again, buy local. Our local business improvement group, they want us to buy within the city. And then this is the kind of the way we go. Can we buy within the city? Okay. Can we buy within, the lower mainland, within like the 50 kilometers from us? Can we buy in our province? Can we buy in our country? And then after that, it's open. But again, as Guy was saying, we have to be fair and transparent. We have to follow trade agreements that Canada has signed. So that also applies to how we do business. But these are usually low dollars. So if we want to go spend 20, 30, 40, 50K, we can do that within the trade agreements and within our procurement policy. Asha, I just want to talk about here some of the benefits, and not only just on here, but other ones. One of the things that we found the benefits is that a lot of times these companies bring new ideas, new perspective on how to get something done, that if you go to the same supplier time and time and time again, you just get the same response, the same thing. So again, it provides that new perspective, and they're connected to the local community. They usually care. Supplier diversity, again, you know, diverse suppliers are women-owned, First Nations, LGBTQ, other. So again, the benefits, new perspective, new solutions, new ideas. So community involvement. In Canada, we have, I should say in BC, we have what's called living wage. And the city of New West, we are one of the first cities in BC to implement the living wage. And what it means is all of our contracts, all the people working on behalf of the city who work within our city boundaries must be paid a living wage. And they sign a declaration, and we audit it based upon complaints. And I think we've been running now for 13 years, and we've only received one complaint. But it also applies to our own staff. So I do work every year with HR to ensure that our staff are all paid a living wage. There are some exemptions, such as volunteers and others, but we ensure that all staff are making a living wage. We also believe, by being involved in the community, that everything we put into this goes back into the community. So it's a circular thing. Sorry. So that's it for my presentation. I think I went a little bit faster there, Guy. But that's a little bit about our city and a little bit about what we do to address both social and sustainable business within the city.
That's great, Patrick. That was really interesting. I have a host of questions for you. So I'm going to kick off in just a moment. But if people want to drop in their questions into the chat, that would be great. And I can see a few dropping in here already. And as we're a relatively small group, don't be afraid to get into the detail. I can see one already around asking about evaluation and the detail of the actual percentages. So I think this is, let's make sure we get into that detail. So I'm going to just start out with something that I heard that kind of really interested me, Patrick. You said that citizens are asking for this. And it's like, that fascinated me, actually. I thought, wow. So how do you know that? I mean, is it that you do a survey? Do you have a citizen sort of panel that you talk to? How do you know they're asking for you? And are they happy that you spend, their tax dollars on all of this green stuff?
Yes to everything you say there. We do have committees. We do research. We, Survey Monkey, all of that. And they actually come to City Hall. And they actually, so our council has basically like an open mic. You get 5 minutes, you register, and you come in and you talk about whatever topic you want to talk about. They all range, like it ranges in topics. Obviously, some of the social ones can have both pro and con. There's always thoughts about if we build housing for, for certain aspects of the community, is it going to cause problems? So, but for the most part, everything you're saying there, Guy, they're asking, they want, like, again, our city council is a very social council. Our city is very social. So they want to be,
so the directives are coming from the council. I mean, what we have within the public sector, for those who don't know, is that the members or the democratically elected council members hold all the power, if you like. As officers, we are bound to follow their policy direction. But they're obviously quite engaged in the social element and the climate element. So that directive is very clear.
Yes, very active. Our mayor walks to work every day, promotes it. He's a huge bike rider, loves it. Yep, so it starts at the mayor and council, residents want it, and then it moves down to how the city plans their 5 years. Like, again, like, okay, we need more park space, we need more shade, we need this, we need that. And so then it builds it into our capital plan.
Okay, and is there a feedback loop about, because the other thing that as a public sector we've got to be conscious of is transparency, not only how we award contracts, which I'll come to in a moment, but this feedback loop to show, yes, we've listened, we understand the need of the community, this is what we're doing, and by the way, this is how well it's doing. Do you provide that in a report, or how does that work, that whole loop of?
So what we do is every year we provide a report back to mayor and council on what we delivered. So those slides you saw, that's not my slides. Those are the slides from the actual departments, engineering, parks, on the work that they did. So it's a time for them to celebrate the work that they've done. And so there is a bit of a loop back on, okay, you know, we had this 5-year plan to, again, look at urban forestry. And every year they talk about what they've done, what they've delivered. Okay,
good. So a lot of questions coming in, and I'm going to split them into 2 bits. I'm going to just kick off with a series of questions around the climate stuff, and then we'll dive into the social bits. So there's a couple of questions around carbon, and I've got one about just your definition of net zero, which you said you're going to be net zero by 2030, which is quite ambitious, I think, but I'd love to understand what you mean by net zero, what the boundary is. And then Jenny asked a question about carbon pricing and how that fits into your decision making. Really interested in those two, because I guess they're both linked, yeah?
Okay, so let me go to carbon pricing. So right now we've only applied it to vehicles. We looked at applying it to buildings, but you need to be a calculus major to do all of that. But interestingly enough, we are working on right now. So we're actually a creator of carbon credits. So we're in BC, we have this trade process where we create carbon credits and we sell them. So we've generated a lot of money for the city in all what we're selling our carbon credits.
And you're selling them to, sorry, who do you sell the credits to?
We sell them to people that create GHGs. So, you know, oil companies, basically.
Okay.
So what we're doing right now is we're actually creating a framework and on how to actually use those credits. And one of the frameworks is if you invest in this project, you're going to reduce the GHGs. And some of those GHGs actually creates new credits. So we're going through right now, we're going to have our first draft of this framework available by end of this summer. So it's creating some questions to ask, but ultimately what we're hoping to get out of there is a simple calculation that says, if you go and replace these 3 gas furnaces with these 3 electric furnaces, here's the GHGs that you're going to save.
Okay.
And but it's going to cost investment money, right? Because
exactly.
Convert gas to electric, sometimes we have to run new lines even into that facility because they don't even. So we're okay. In Canada, we're an old city. Europe, we're not an old city. But our city is, you know, we're 150 years old. So some of our buildings, the electrical part, I know you're just a twinkle in the eye. But it's like, okay, we don't even have the electrical power in this. So we've now got to go and spend $20,000 to be able to bring enough power into that building.
And your net zero definition then is all your own operated buildings, your own fleet.
Correct.
That's how you're defining it. Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Well, not Scope 3, Scope 1 and 2, effectively. Is that right?
I will say this, I'm not the best person to answer this question. I would need to bring in my climate change advisor. If I knew that, I would have brought her in here on this call because you wouldn't be able to set her up. But sorry, I mean that nice. Hopefully she doesn't listen to me, but she can answer that question better than I.
Okay, fine. Okay, got it. Good. Okay, we've got a question here from Mohan. I think it's quite important question actually, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Mohan. Forgive me if I didn't. So how do you, and I thought when I was listening to you, I was really interested about this as well. How do you evaluate vendors bringing innovation onto the table during an RFQ? Do you follow? So basically, it's the price, technical, I guess the climate sustainability bit. What's the weightings? How do you evaluate it? Or is it just you screen the companies and they're either in or out? They've either got the right sustainability credentials or they don't. How do you actually bring that into the decision as a procurer?
So the first thing we have to say is we have a set of documents that guides our city project managers on what they want to build. So right off the bat, the specs are designed to meet net zero, like be LEED gold. So we tell the business, you must do this, you must meet these requirements. So that's in the design. So that's given to the architect or the engineering. So they build that into the design. Then what we do, depending on what we're building, is we will shortlist some suppliers. And when we interview them, we ask about, well, what other options, what other innovations can you bring in? But this is still relatively new for us. If I talk to my engineers on how to bring innovation in for paving a street, they just look at me like I got 5 heads, because like, we mean innovation to paving a street. But there is an innovation. There is ways you can reduce the number of dump trucks taking loads down to your landfill. But you can see the shift, but it's getting them to move along first.
Okay.
Some of the departments, like our parks, they're all over, of course. They're all over this, right? They constantly seek out suppliers who think like them.
Got it.
So what we do is in those projects where it is critical to, okay, here's a simple one. We are bringing in smart meters into our city. So smart meters are those electric meters. Instead of having people drive around, doing hand or manual readings, it's all done through airwaves. Like, it's just the signals are sent, hits a repeater and comes to us. We gather all the data. So there's a GHG reduction just by installing it, because now we don't have meter readers going out. But we're going to recycle 45 to 50,000 meters. So an important question for them was, how were they going to recycle these in a social, sustainable model? So we asked a very specific question on that.
Okay, got it.
On other ones, the whole social sustainable right now is currently only 5%.
So it's 5% weighting. So I think that cuts to the part of the question that Mohan was trying to ask, which is how the weightings work within your evaluation. So you've got sustainability as 5%, cost as, how much is the cost piece?
10 to 20. 10 to 20.
Oh, and the rest is the quality or technical?
Yes, because we don't, I don't believe that, I think cost is relevant. It depends on what you're getting. If you're buying widgets, it's higher. But a lot of times we're not buying a widget, we're buying a service, a solution. And I believe we need to get away from cost being such a high factor and more into the supplier, the partner, what are they bringing to the table? Because cost, cost is important. Like, we're not going to pick somebody that's so far out of budget.
No, of course not.
But it's, again, if you heard me earlier, it's an emphasis on best value.
Okay, yeah, best value. And so the best value is a combination of sustainability, price, and technical quality. So and do you ever see a time where, given that sustainability and net zero for the city is so important, do you see a time where that 5% on sustainability might go to 15, 20%? I mean, why so low? I mean, it's quite a low number at the moment, isn't it?
I think it's low. Well, first of all, it's getting buy-in, so it's still relatively new, like it's getting buy-in. But I will probably bring it up to 10. I don't think I'll bring it up to 20. And the reason behind that is even our provincial government recommends not to go up to 20, because it can impact how decisions are made. And sometimes a supplier with very good social sustainable response is not the most technically capable company of doing the work. So it's that balance to ensure that we're getting the right supplier first.
Okay, good. Another question here that's sort of going down the same line, which is around diversity. And so Jenny Miles has asked this. How do you determine if you are working with a local and or diverse supplier? And I think I'm going to link this one to a question around greenwash, and let's call it social wash green, but not actually being true. So how do you check that actually isn't just a really good submission and that actually these companies are local, are diverse? What are you doing about avoiding greenwashing?
So there's a couple things. We allow people to self-recognize, like, say, I am this, and we accept that. Depending on the dollar amount, there's also associations where they can be registered. And so if it's something higher value, we will be requiring them to show that they're registered. When we're engaging with Indigenous organizations, it's a little more sensitive. And I have an Indigenous advisor who I'll be working with to determine if they're considered Indigenous or not. So it's not an easy answer, but we've got these steps in where, if they...
Fine. So there's sensitivities there. One would expect that you've got to be. I understand that. And then this other thing around local, or I think you called it lower provinces or something, lower mainland. I think you said it. I've forgotten what you called it. You got these sort of this tiered approach to sort of where the how do you award? I mean, do you actually award points? So let's say you've got exactly the same price, exactly the same quality. Climate change is exactly the same. The only difference is between whether it's a local business or someone that's in sort of from another part of Canada. How do you transparently award that and ensure you're not breaking trade rules?
So depends again all on the dollar amount. So depends which trade agreement we're using, because we have several trade agreements even within our own country. But my procurement policy is actually lower than any of the trade agreements. So right now, $0 to $75,000, we don't have to go through any public process.
All right, so $0 to $75,000, right? Okay.
Yeah, so within $75,000, we can award to whoever we want to award. And the emphasis is buying local, because news gets out. We were in the newspaper a couple of years ago because we hired somebody 10 kilometers away when somebody in the city could have done it. So like I said, our mayor and council, they're very engaged with the community, and that got up to them and got down. So there's this whole internal, and again, we react, which is I'm pretty proud of, that the city reacts quickly to things like this. Okay. So again, if it's over 75K, then we go through the public process.
Okay, and so presumably, and if it's over 75K, the public process, do you have a mechanism to give an advantage to a local business? Because you still want to do that. It's local money, it's local taxpayers' money, they want to spend it locally. So do you have a mechanism to be able to do that within your procurement policy?
Yes and no. It's very hard to bring that part in, making it fair, because it's very subjective. So it would be based upon the evaluation. So we evaluate the organization as a whole. And so an organization as a whole brings value to the city. If they're local. So they would score higher in that section.
Oh, so you do have, this cuts to one of the questions, which I think is around measurement. And so how is sustainable procurement performance measured? Q asked this question. And I guess it's beginning to go down that sort of that route. So if it's just subjective, how do you actually defend that decision if you're challenged by the losing bidder, let's say? Do you have a scoring mechanism for it?
Yes, we do.
You can fall, but you do. Okay,
we
fine.
do. We don't share it publicly. It's with internal, unless it's important. But again, in the trade agreements, you can't necessarily, how do I say, you can't say you prefer local. But there's ways. So a lot of times our projects require travel, requires time zones.
Yeah.
So there's other ways where, again, we're a big country. We have 6 different time zones. So if you have people in our West Coast and you have people in the East Coast, and you need to get a hold of them versus somebody local, there's a cost associated with that. There's a value associated with that.
Okay, fine. Got it. So you can take, you've got ways of taking this into account then. And there's if we can just stick with Q's question from Aaron, how is sustainable procurement performance measured? I guess that's sort of talking about sort of the outcome of what you have done and just ensuring that you're achieving the outcomes you set out to achieve and how you report that back. Well, how do you measure? So is it just carbon, or is it, I mean, are there other metrics you use to measure that?
So right now, we don't have any measurement tools. One of the things we're bringing in is a new e-bidding system.
Okay.
So right now, we're like I said, we're a small city, so we're very manual. We looked at this, and I would need to hire another person just to kind of manage how we do this. So within this e-bidding system, we are going to be able to extract the type of data like this.
Okay.
You know, how many contracts were awarded to X types of suppliers? How many contracts were awarded? How many responses did we receive? See, that's one of the things that we hear in government, is that our processes are complicated, and they're you know, small business, Indigenous businesses, they can't respond. They're too difficult. They're overwhelmed. So in the city, we've been trying to simplify our process, and moving to an e-bidding, we're going to start being able to see the types of companies responding, and we're going to see if we can. So part of my job in the next year is reaching out to the community, reaching out to the Indigenous, reaching out to local businesses, reaching out to you know, LGBT, women-owned, and ask, why aren't you responding to city RFPs? What can we do?
That's interesting. Yeah, so that's interesting. And if anyone, because we're quite a small group, if anyone wants to jump in and ask a question, please show your face and raise your hand and unmute yourself. But I'm just interested in that piece you just mentioned, which I think we find here in the UK a big issue, which is especially within the smaller businesses, you know, the LGBTQ businesses, building capacity, building the ability, and also just them getting over the hurdle of thinking, well, public procurement's not really for us, it's just too much of a pain, right? So do you have programs around building that capacity and outreach?
So we have formed last year a group that is working on again, Indigenous reconciliation, but I'm working with that group to expand not only Indigenous reconciliation, but also working with smaller businesses. So I am working with our business improvement area. Like I have many departments within the city I have to work with. And I'm a small little department. We have a team of 9, and 5 of them are in the warehouse. So that's 4 of us in the procurement department. So we're very small. We're doing these things on the side of our desk.
All right. Is it, and this in procurement, are you a centralized, do you provide for all categories?
Yes.
So, and then contract management, if you like, the checking that this vendor or the supplier is delivering is done by the category teams. You don't do contract management. How does that work?
And again, in our city, under 75K, they are not required to go through procurement. They don't have to go through us. But they have to follow procurement policy, and we manage to ensure that they follow. Over 75K, they have to go through us. And there's only 3 people in our city that can sign contracts, and I'm one of those 3.
Okay, so you,
And so I sign the
you know
vast
what's happening.
majority of contracts.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So
okay,
I
interesting.
it has to go through me, so I know what's going on, and I ensure fairness and transparency on that. So we are centralized, a little bit of control, and I have the purchasing department has a lot of respect from our senior management, so they fully support us.
Okay, good. I'm going to invite David Loseby, who I know is lurking there somewhere. I can see him. Hopefully you can jump in, David. I've caught you mid-munch. I saw that question around benchmark and other cities. Do you want to ask that question of Patrick? So I'm not just dominating, then I might bring in, I don't know if Mohan wants to jump in after that, or Catherine or Jenny come to that. Why don't you ask a question, David?
Sure. I think one of the things that obviously, and I should be transparent as well, insofar as I've just done probably a 3-month research program on evaluating social value, social responsible procurement, etc., across the globe. So one of the things that's sort of intrigued me is how we drive more consistency for the benefit of procurement professionals and the credibility that then therefore goes with that, is understanding the extent to which we can get, I'll call it a unified approach, across what we do in different geographies, and indeed therefore then drive consistency within the profession. So I'd be interested to understand, to what extent do you see, or what are the mechanisms for driving consistency across Canada as an example, in terms of the approach that you take. So in other words, if I went and did I'll call it a diagnostic on Westminster, and I then went across to somewhere in Quebec or somewhere up in St. John or wherever, you know, would it look exactly the same in each of those geographies?
Good question, and I would say I don't have an answer, because you're asking the $1 million question. I would say $1 billion question or $1 trillion question, because I agree with you. I belong to an informal group of purchasing managers across this province. So we meet on a monthly basis and discuss things. And even amongst us, we have different opinions on, or different directions. So I would love something to be done, but this would have to be led by a larger organization than us, probably higher level, like the province or the federal government. They would have to lead this. Yeah. They would have to bring this in, because I don't, like, the cities are too busy just dealing with our own internal city, worrying about what the sister cities beside us are doing.
Yeah.
But I'm 100% behind what you're saying. I would love to support that.
And what do you think somebody could do in terms of, I'll call it, creating at least a network of respected bodies and people to be able to sort of at least attempt to deliver a degree of, I'll call it, inclusion and fairness towards how you could create that? What, from your perspective, what are those sort of institutions, bodies, etc., that could actually represent, I'll call it, a fair representation of people across the different states and federal, if you like, entities?
Well, we do, like I said, we have different levels of government, but there are some for-profit organizations who have a better pulse on what's going on than I do, because they live this world. You know, even though social sustainable procurement is important, it still only takes a small part of my job, of my everyday job. So, yeah, you know, I have a whole department to run. I've got a whole bunch of other work. Yeah, that's the one I was going to say, exactly, Jenny. Jenny's from West Coast here. Her and I are on the same board. That's the one I was thinking about. We have a BC Social Procurement Institute. We've got a few other groups. I would say if we were ever going to do that in BC, these are the type of people I would reach out to out first.
Okay. Okay.
But I'm with you. If you could create something here, I would love it. It's just, it takes somebody with the effort to go and get it done.
Can I
It's a
ask
lot of work.
Jenny, do you work with Patrick in New Westminster, or are you part of another council, Jenny? There you are, Jenny. You've just unmuted yourself, which is excellent.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
actually
we
just yeah, I work for the BC Lottery Corporation, so it's a crown corporation in the province
right.
of British Columbia.
Okay, and where do you sit in embedding and following some of Patrick's lead around embedding climate change issues and social sustainability into your decision making as a state-funded lottery?
So we're a social purpose company, and I'm actually the manager of social and sustainable procurement. So my role started here a year ago. So we're kind of on the start of our journey, but yeah, it's really important to our organization. So I'm embedded within the procurement department to integrate social and sustainable procurement practices.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that's good. And so it sounds like there's a need for some collective sort of getting together on this. Good. Okay, let's keep some questions going. So so I'm going to ask Mohan, who I asked his question. But Mohan, do you have any other questions that you want to ask our colleague Patrick around what you're doing? If you're there, Mohan. No, he's not. Don't worry about it.
Okay, while Mohan is coming back on, so 2 weeks ago, so Jenny and I belong onto the same supply chain institute within our province. So we're an institute of 750 members of supply chain professionals. A couple of weeks ago, we held our AGM symposium, and we had a topic on ESGs. Now I'm just wrecked the acronym, and we had a panel up front there, and it was very engaging. And Jenny was one of the panelists, so it was exciting to see, because we're all procurement experts, and just the questions that were going on with. We had larger companies, we had 3 government and 1 private, I believe, corporation on the panel. But again, what it does is it creates the talk, the discussion. What are people doing? What are corporations doing to meet the goals?
No, I've got it. So I'm kind of interested in just chatting a little bit about the social. Mohan, you're there, you're back, but it doesn't matter. We'll come back to the social sustainability elements, and so. Regardless of the size of the business, and I do understand that you can choose local businesses, I'm kind of interested in whether or not, if you've got 2 businesses, and let's say the contract is $250,000 for the sake of argument, and it's highways resurfacing or something like that. So it's not insignificant, it's not massive. And you've got 2 businesses, and one is just giving, good price, normal stuff, but no particular social benefit, but although they do have a good ESG policy. And the other business actually supports in homelessness because it's got some outreach programs, for instance. So it's active in the community as opposed to just having a policy. Do you have a mechanism that allows you to select, that organization that is active in the community and is helping solve the issue of homelessness, or is it still done on price and quality, and you haven't really got a way of doing that? Because I'm just interested in that, whether you've got that mechanism there.
No, we don't, because we can't, because it's very hard to comply with a trade agreement, but it depends on how. So we use, every RFP is evaluated on 100%. So every question has a weighting applied to it. So that's why another reason why we keep price low, because we want to make sure that we're getting best value. If a certain project requires a higher social, it will be revised. Like we've moved it up to 10% on a couple of them. We've even made social specific questions that will be higher percentages. So when we know that we need to address something in this, then we customize our questions to address that issue. So social might be worth 20% if we wanted to. But overall, on the everyday stuff, we're saying it's minimum 5%.
Okay, got it. Okay, so let's have I think probably another 5 minutes or so, Patrick. We'll keep the conversation going, if that's okay. So, and David, if you've got a question or anyone else has a question, please jump in. But I'm just going to ask a question around sort of kind of future, really, now, where you're going with all of this. So, you know, made some great strides, and this program has been, you've been doing this for 3 years, 4 years, that sort of period. So where do you see this going? What's your ambition now as a, you know, procurement purchasing manager? What the city's ambition for the next sort of 5 years in all of this?
So one of the things we're working on right now is we're going to update our social sustainable procurement policy. That's one of the first things. Then we're going to do, so I've been in discussions with a lot of cities across this country, even attending these events, listening and seeing what needs to be done. And one of the key points I took out of there is we have to work internal within the city first. We need the project managers to understand the benefit of social sustainable. But they also have a very tough job because they have to deliver a project on budget. So you're balancing taxpayer funded, like taxpayers' money, to deliver a project. So there's that really delicate balance of understanding how much you're willing to pay more to have a more social sustainable project. And it's not a cookie cutter. It's not one process works for all.
Okay.
So it's getting buy-in, then it's going out and working with my staff on how we're even going to again make another significant change on how we do our RFXs.
Can I make a suggestion, Patrick? One of the things, I mean, obviously I've been involved in this for quite a number of years, and oddly enough, I was actually the CPO for Westminster City Council, which is in the UK. And they typically spend just over £1 billion a year. So my staff contingent was about 130, so slightly bigger. But nevertheless, we would look at linking projects whereby we would look at I'll call it the portfolio projects, and say, for instance, and I'll use the example that Guy gave, which is to think about recycling or reclaiming the materials from one project that could be, for instance, demolition, crushing the sort of the demolition debris, and then being able to use that as the substrate for a piece of footpath, highway, whatever, in another project. So therefore, you're starting to think about how you can link activity, and to your point, that you therefore are delivering better value. In other words, costs less actually, particularly because you're doing it within a specific geography. So you're creating more social value, but also that gives you the opportunity then to say, actually, I want local contractors to do that. And so the story goes on. So I think it's trying to sort of utilize, I'll call it more of a portfolio approach, rather than just looking at singular pieces of activity, albeit that is a constraint I recognize in public procurement. But I think it's getting the support, particularly from the council members and the council leaders, if you like, to be able to do a slightly different approach to what you're doing, and utilizing sometimes, which is why I talked about benchmarking, utilizing other case studies to illustrate the benefits of taking a different approach to the procurement than might otherwise traditionally be held as good practice, as in you're not simply looking at the singular contract, you're looking at a more I'll call it diverse approach. I don't know what you think.
I think it's a great idea. We have some very simplified processes. Every demolition of every building in our city, we require the general contractor to recycle as much material as possible. So it's part of the contract. Some of it is easy to recycle. It's wood. We we were able to sell some of our very expensive beams and reuse it somewhere else. So we do bring it in, but not to the extent you're talking about, you know, where if you crush some gravel, can you put it in a bike path somewhere else in the city? We're not quite there yet. Good point. And I'm going to go ask my park people right after this going, hey, how come I don't recycle the material? I just learned something, you know, we need to recycle stuff over there and put it over there. And because we've got a lot of plans for upgrading, and, you know, like paths and that continuously have to have rework done on them. So,
yeah.
You know, good point. We're going to pave this. How can I reuse that material? But again, I have to work with two different departments. I got to work with engineering and parks and get them to go together, and can it be done? But it's a great idea. I'm actually going to ask why we can't do that. And then I'm going to get yelled at again.
Yeah, it is about prioritizing as well. I do accept that, because you can't do everything everywhere. Otherwise, it just becomes such a humongous matrix to try and manage. So you do have to sort of prioritize a bit, but we would choose, you know, 3, 4, 5 things and say, right, let's just try and get these executed, because it gives us a chance to sort of establish the practice, but also demonstrate the value in the collective of doing something like that, rather than trying to tackle everything and then failing spectacularly. So I do recognize the practicalities.
I'm going to ask that question. It's actually an excellent question, because every year we pave streets, and every year we take as whatever needs to be taken down. So I'm going to go ask that question. I'm going to go say, hey, how come we're not recycling this?
And you can even stockpile it as well. So if you're not using it straight away, you can stockpile it and then use it.
I'm a very small city. I have no land to stockpile.
All right, okay.
Anyway, we thought we would just be learning from you today, Patrick, and here you've got a nugget of information from one of our guests. Good. Well, look, I'm going to sort of call it a close now.
Yeah.
That's been a really, really interesting, practical presentation, Patrick. I did really enjoy listening to you. It was fascinating to see. I mean, what I really took out of it, that it doesn't matter whether you're a big or a small city, but you're a small city. You're not kind of big with loads of resources. You know, this thing about just doing a little bit, starting out, doing a bit, I think is so important, because sometimes these challenges can seem so big and you think, well, we're just a small place, so why should we bother? But I think you've shown that it all matters, and I think it's fantastic. So with that, let me thank Patrick for and everyone else for their questions and contributions to the discussion. Thanks very much indeed. And watch this space. Please do join, and we'll send you another link to a webinar very soon. So have a good afternoon, evening, morning, everybody. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.